it's a real neat story. Now, what I wanted to do is, you know me, I like maps and I like history and that sort of thing. So today, now I've got enough notes in here with this class to go for about 2.5 hours. So we're not going to go 2.5 hours. I'm just going to breeze through a bunch of this stuff, but I wanted to put some of this stuff into historical perspective as to where and when the book of Esther and the story of Esther actually took place. And I thought that was kind of interesting as we look at that. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the Assyrian invasion and exile. Now, you know that if you remember the story of Israel, and right after King Solomon died, then the kingdom was divided up. The people did not go with his son Rehoboam, because Rehoboam was going to continue on with their excessive taxes and burdensome work details and so forth that Solomon did. In fact, Solomon had a fabulous kingdom there, but he basically just wore the people down. And so when his son Rehoboam came to the throne, some of the advisors came to the older advisors that were advisors to Solomon, said, okay, we've built everything now. It's time to cut back on taxes and these forced labor and all that kind of stuff. Well, you know how governments are. Even back then, once they have taxes, they're just never going to roll them back for anything. And so Rehoboam's younger advisors said, no, just your father only hit part of them. Go ahead and hit the rest of them with heavy stuff and even be greater than your father. So that's what he did, and that's the kingdom then split up, and you had the northern kingdom of the 10 tribes, and then the southern kingdom, which was Judah and Benjamin, and they became known as Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And you'll note that Levi is not included because they had no set territory, but they had cities of Levites scattered out all throughout both in the north and the south. And also, people talk about the 10 lost tribes. Well, there's a whole ton of the people from the 10 tribes moved down to Judah because they did not like what Jeroboam, who had broken away, he was doing. He was setting up a system of idolatry, idol worship, and up in Dan. If you go up to Dan today, they have a mock-up of a altar like they would have had in Jerusalem. Well, they got a mock-up up there in Dan, and so Jeroboam set up a temple and things like that, so that the people could do their sacrifices up in Dan and not have to come down to Jerusalem. It was a way of trying to keep his kingdom together. And what happened then is, because of all of this idolatry, God had warned them that if you keep doing this, you're going to be punished for it. And so they kept up with the idolatry, and if you ever read any of Jonathan Cahn's books, you'll notice that he talks about that how the Assyrians came in for kind of a hit and run invasion several years before they came in, and actually God gave the northern kingdoms a warning, and they didn't heed the warning, and they kept up with their idolatry. So then in 2 Kings 17 and 5 and 6, we read that this says that then the king of Assyria invaded the entire country, marched up to Samaria, and besieged it for 3 years. In the 9th year of Hosea. Now, that turns out to be 722 BCE. I added these dates in there so that we can kind of get it in history here. The king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He placed them in Hala and Habor on the Gozan River and in the towns of the Medes. Now, one thing that the king or the Assyrians did that was very effective, they were terrorists. They were ruthless. They were animals, and when they invaded places, they were so ruthless that people just were in fear of them, because if you resisted and you lost, they had just all sorts of ways of torturing you, and it was it just put fear and dread in everyone. And so then what they did also was that they took the people from the places that they had invaded, and basically they took out all of the smart guys, the one with the PhDs and the doctor's degrees and accounting degrees and all these different things, all of the educated people and the rich people. They pulled them out and took them into their host country, back up into Assyria. And basically, instead of keeping the Jews together, they just kind of scattered them out all over the place so that they didn't really have a sense of community. And eventually they did lose out their I guess you'd say their Jewishness. And so that's why people call them now the 10 lost tribes. Now that group was pretty well assimilated, and then the Assyrians would then bring their own citizens down into the conquered countries that they had and assimilate into there, and try, then that way they could put their style of rulership into the country that they invaded. So that's what they did in the northern tribes there in Israel, and that was the northern part of there and down into Samaria. And so anyway, that happened in 722, like I said. And the south, of course, that didn't, Judah and Benjamin, they didn't escape punishment either, because, they also went into idolatry. And you can read how the prophets were always talking to these guys about, you need to get back to God, you need to get back to God. Well, they didn't heed that. So you'll see that in 2 Kings 25, 1 and 2, it says, "Now it came to pass in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, that Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and his entire army advanced against Jerusalem, set up camp against by it, built a siege wall all around it, so that the city was under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah, 586 BCE. Again, I added the dates in there. And this was all prophesied by the various prophecies that were down there. So anyway, the captivity in Babylon lasted 70 years, and Jeremiah said that thus says Adonai, after 70 years for Babylon are complete, I will visit you and fulfill my good word toward you to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares Adonai, plans for shalom and not calamity, and to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you." That's, of course, that's a famous verse that we all like to claim for ourselves, that He has plans for us, and I'm sure He does. That certainly the God of the universe that created everything didn't create us for nothing, and He wants us to have good things. So after the 70 years is up, He does indeed deliver the people, but in the meantime, He did punish the people, the Babylonians, for what they had done to Judah. And typically God would do that. He would use other countries to punish Israel and to chastise them to because of their idolatry or whatever, and then he would take care of the country that did that. That was just the way that God did it. So in 539 BCE, the Babylonian Empire then falls to the Persian Empire under Cyrus, and that's in Ezra 1 and 2. It says, now in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, and that's in 538 BCE, in order to accomplish the word of Adonai from the mouth of Jeremiah, Adonai stirred up the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia to make a proclamation throughout his entire kingdom, announcing in a written edict, thus says King Cyrus of Persia, Adonai, the God of heaven, has given me all of the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build a house for him in Jerusalem, which is in Judea, in Judah. And the story goes about there that Cyrus said that God actually appeared to him. There was some type of a theophany that appeared to Cyrus and told him, look, I want you to set up the house of worship for the Jews back in Jerusalem, because that is where I have put my name, and that's what I want you to do. So basically Cyrus then, he took that to heart, and he set up the people to go back to Jerusalem, and instead of having a kingdom there, then he set them up with an actual spiritual kingdom of a place of worship. And so that was one of those great, I don't know, you'd call it a miracle, because these guys are not in the habit of listening to God, but Cyrus did. And so he sent, there was Nehemiah and Ezra and several others that he sent back to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And so there were about 50,000 Jews returned from exile, and that, you remember that they had first been dispersed in 722 BCE. That was almost 200 years earlier. So they had, in many cases, they'd settled into the empire, and they had done well. Our Jewish folks, put us someplace, and pretty soon we'll have the best delis in town, and the jewelry stores, and the banks, and that's just what God puts in us. So what these guys, they had their houses, their businesses in the kingdoms, and so in the empire. So they decided, we'll just stay here rather than going back to Israel, because in many cases they never knew Israel. These guys had been there for, their families were taken 200 years prior to that. They had never even been to Israel, and we'll see that in Esther's case. Now, I got a timeline here for Esther. Now, if you looked at the slides that I sent out yesterday, these dates over here to the right, where it right now you see it, and it says 486 BCE. Well, now that had been 117 years later, in like 350 something or 360 something, whatever 117 minus 486 minus 117 is. There's a difference because of the way that they redid the counting of the years, and so it just depends on. From what I could tell, there was this deal here, the 3392. That is the Jewish year. That has pretty much stayed the same, and both accountings. But then this 486. Now, when Ahasuerus ascends to the throne of Persia, now that only becomes important if you're trying to determine who Ahasuerus is. Is he Xerxes or is he Artaxerxes? And so that's that's that may be important to historians or whatever, but for our understanding of this story, not so much. I don't think it's all that important. So anyway, here is the timeline for this, and you'll see that it actually takes place over about a 14-year period. We think of Purim as, okay, it happens all within just a couple of 3 days. But no, the actual story of it all will last about 14 years from the time that Ahasuerus ascends to the throne until they have their Purim celebration and an edict for all the Jewish people to do this, to celebrate Purim. And so anyway, let's go ahead and get into the story. And again, I said that, I'm taking these notes for Purim from all over the web, but the actual story itself is from a book by a lady named Jill Shannon, a prophetic calendar called The Feast of Israel. And so what I did was I copied that down, and I'm going to send it out in the notes as a I think I'll try to send it out as a reference for you. I think you can find it on the web that way. And because it is quite lengthy here, and she goes into a lot of other details, so that are kind of interesting, but not so much in the story. Now, if you read up on Esther all over the web, you can see that there are some people that say that that the book of Esther, or the story of Esther, is kind of a fairy tale, or it's a nice story, but it never really happened because they weren't real sure that Ahasuerus was Xerxes or whatever. But I think there's enough evidence to say that these were real characters, and if the story didn't happen exactly like they're saying it is, they don't have any evidence one way or the other whether it could not have. So anyway, the story goes that Ahasuerus ascends to the throne, and he is he's kind of like his father, and if you'll note that some of these Eastern potentates, they would have their advisors get them to sign something, and they'd sign it only to realize afterwards that guess what, there was something wrong there. And we saw the same thing in the book of Daniel, and so that under the Medes and the Persians, the Darius, the Mede, was tricked into signing something that would basically put Daniel in the lion's den. Well, once he'd signed it, he can't unsign it. So Darius then did put Daniel in the lion's den, and then he fasted and prayed all night that the God of Daniel would keep him safe. Well, the next morning he gets up, goes to the zoo, looks down in there, and there's Daniel hanging out with all the lions. And so he was so happy. Then he took all of the advisors that had gotten him to sign this thing against Daniel, and they became cat food. And he killed all of them by dumping them in the lion's den instead. So there is a little bit of a history with that sort of thing, and we see that with the case of Ahasuerus, this guy Haman had come along and had gotten Ahasuerus or Xerxes, Artaxerxes, whatever is, whichever one you want to pick. He'd gotten him to sign this edict to get rid of the Jews. But anyway, let's go ahead with the story here that Ahasuerus had a feast and it lasted 180 days. That's 6 months of feasting, and wow, that must have been some party. And you know the story how that Ahasuerus he's drunk and he decides, okay, we're going to he says, I want my wife Vashti, Queen Vashti, to come and dance for all of my friends here with her royal crown on. And what he meant was he wanted her to dance with nothing but a smile and a towel and the royal crown. And she said, no way, Jose, am I going to do that? You know, this Queen Vashti was actually the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. So, I mean, she had, she was not somebody that, you know, they had just picked, and she was not going to be cowed by this guy. So anyway, Ahasuerus then says, oh man, what am I going to do? Because he had been humiliated by his wife here. And so, you know, you would think that he would just kill her. But for some reason, and I don't understand why, he didn't kill her. His advisor said, well, look, you're going to have to do something, because if you don't, then all the wives in the empire are going to say, hey, well, Vashti got by with it, and then they're going to be treating their own husbands the same way, and then you're going to really have problems. So they said, well, what to do? Okay, we'll just banish her. And so they did. They just banished her, took away her crown, and that was the end of that. So then later on, Ahasuerus says, well, you know, I really do need a queen. I need somebody there. And so he put out the Miss Assyrian beauty pageant, and they picked Esther. Long story short, they picked Esther. And she was a fourth generation, at least a fourth generation resident of Shushan, which is over in Middle East. And let me see if I think I have the picture of it right now, someplace here. Let me see if I can find it. There, yeah, I got a picture of it. You can see it. I'm just going to pull it up real quick. If it'll pull up, it didn't do that. Okay. Well, never mind. Anyway, there was a picture. Here it is. And we're great. I just like I said, I like maps and knowing where things are. So you can see once this thing pulls up that here is the Shushan or Susa where Esther was from. So anyway, that's kind of where she was from, and she'd been there 4 generations at least. I mean, her family. So really, she had never been to Israel. She was not, you know, she was from Shushan, and so as such, then she really didn't have as such. She didn't really have that much of a connection with Israel, and in fact, that was my part of my sermon this week. Haman then he devised a way. He went to Ahasuerus and said, "Look, there's a group of people in your kingdom, in your empire, that don't." That they don't obey your rules like everybody else does. They have their own rules. And so we're going to, just let me eliminate these folks, because it could be dangerous to your kingdom. And I'll put 10,000 talents of silver into the treasury for the guys to do this. And the king says, okay, yeah, that's fine. And he signed off on it. And then that was so Haman started his planning to kill the Jews. And when this edict came out, Mordecai, it says he tore his clothes and he put on sackcloth and he was going around the town crying aloud that over what was going on with this. And Esther heard about it, and so she found out what's going on, and found out what this death warrant was. So anyway, she Mordecai talked to her and said, look, here's I want you to go to the king and tell him that you got to do something about this because you're going to be killed. And he says, you're Jewish, so you're going to have to tell him. Well, Esther then, she comes along and says, well, the king's servants and the people of the kingdom prophets fully understand that for anyone, man or woman, who approaches the king in the inner courtyard without being summoned, he has one law, and that be put to death unless the king extends his golden scepter, permitting him to live. Now, I think we can understand that what Esther is telling Mordecai is that, no way, Jose, I'm not going to do that, because if I do that, he's going to kill me. And Mordecai says to her then, well, look, you got to understand that you are Jewish. You've been in the palace now for 2 or 3 or 4 years, away from all of us, but you are Jewish. And guess what? Now, who knew that Mordecai looked like Omar Sharif? I didn't know that until I found these old photos. But anyway, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther with this answer, and it's very famous. He said, do not think in your soul that you will escape the king's household more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether you have attained royal status for such a time as this? So, Mordecai tells her and said, look, you are going to have to face up to the fact that you are Jewish, and he's going to kill all of your family and a whole bunch of the rest of us if you don't do this. So what did she, they're going to kill them all. And so even how many thousand, 50,000 that had returned back into Israel. Remember, Israel was still, even though they had allowed them to go back to Israel, that Israel was still under the authority of the Persian Empire. So they would have just gone in there and killed them off too. So anyway, what did Esther say? All right, go and gather all the people who are in Shushan and fast fast for me. It says, do not eat or drink for 3 days and nights, and my maids and I will do the same. Afterwards, I will go to the king, even though it is not according to the law. It says, if I perish, then I perish. Now, there's another thing that I don't know if you had if I ever thought of this. There is not one mention of God anywhere in the book of Esther. I don't know if you knew that, but there is not. And there's also the word pray is not in there. But fasting in the Jewish culture was so intertwined with prayer that when you were fasting, it was always prayer with the fasting. So you didn't even have to say fasting and prayer. It was all put together. And so she said, so it was understood that if you fast, you're going to be praying. Well, who are you going to pray to? You're going to pray. These are Jews. They're going to pray to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this is what they end up doing. And she goes to the king, and sure enough, she goes there, and he looks up at her, and he says, "Ooh, wow, there's my queen. If she shows up here like this, knowing that she should be killed, this must be kind of important." Says, so he extended his scepter to her, and asked her, says, "Okay, what can I do for you, my queen, and even up to the half of the kingdom?" And she says, "I just want you to come eat dinner with me, and you and Haman." That's basically, and he said, "That's it?" He says, "Yeah, I've got this feast planned for it." And Ahasuerus, he's all into feasting and drinking. So he says, "Sure, let's do it." So they go in and they have this feast. And so at the time, then what happens is that she still doesn't reveal what it is that she's wanting. So they have this feast, and the king says, "Well, what is it that you want?" And she said, "Well, I'll tell you what. Let me have one more feast tomorrow, and if you will come to that, I will tell you then what it is that I need." So, I mean, she had him hooked. I mean, he was thinking, "Wow, I wonder. This is kind of interesting. She's got my interest." And so, I mean, she played the 1001 Arabian Nights kind of a thing. And so the suspense was just killing him. He says, "All right. Well, what happens then?" Haman goes home, and he is so proud of himself because he says, "Man, I'm going to go to a second meeting, a special dinner with the queen and the king, and it's just me, just the three of us for one more time." And on his way to going home, he sees Mordecai, and Mordecai, still defiant. He's not going to bow down. So made Haman really, really mad. He goes home, tells his wife, and she says, "Hey, why don't you build a gallows?" And he says, "That's a good idea, and we'll get the king to hang Mordecai tomorrow." And after this feast. So anyway, then that night before the feast the next day, the king Ahasuerus was home, and he couldn't sleep. And so he says, "Okay, I know what happens when you can't sleep. It's not no-dose. You don't take Somanex or whatever. Bring out the records of the government, and we'll read the Code of Federal Regulations here. And I know that will put me to sleep." Any of you have ever had to read the Code of Federal Regulations for the U.S. government know that those are sleepers. And so anyway, he's sitting there reading or having read to him the code, and he comes across this recording of when Mordecai had saved his life by telling him about this assassination attempt. And so he asked his assistants there. He said, "Was anything ever done for Mordecai?" And said, "No, sir, nothing was ever done for him. He was never rewarded." And he goes, "Huh." And about that time, he notices that there's somebody out there in the courtyard, and he says, "Okay, who's there?" And it was Haman. Haman was coming to ask the king to be able to hang Mordecai the next day. Well, and he had to kind of ask him because Mordecai was a civil servant, and that would have been messy. Anytime you want to sack a civil servant, it's kind of messy. So anyway, he says, "Oh, glad you're here. I'm really glad you're here. I want to ask you a question." He says, "If I had someone that I really wanted to honor and just show everybody in Shushan what a wonderful person he was, what would you do?" Well, of course, Haman thinks, "Oh, wow, this is for me." He's wanting to know, this is kind of a sly way. That old sly Ahasuerus, he's trying to figure out a way to tell people how good I am. So, I mean, that's how haughty this dude was. So anyway, he said, "Well, I tell you what we would do. We would put him on the king's horse, and put a robe on him and put a crown on him and ride him through, lead him through the streets of Shushan with a lot of fanfare, telling everybody, this is a man who the king wants to honor. This is a man who is very much an important person, and the king really likes him. And so the king says, great, that's a good idea. Tomorrow morning, I want you to go and get Mordecai and do that for him. Well, can you say pop in your bubble? So Haman is just absolutely distraught, because now he figures, okay, now something, I've got this edict going out to kill all the Jews, and the king is now saying, oh, Mordecai is one of my buds. I like this guy because he saved my life. And so now what happens to me? And so he goes home, and his wife says, well, I think that you probably had better cool it against Mordecai for right now until things blow over. Well, while they're sitting there talking about it, the king's servants come back to the house of Haman and says, okay, it's time to go to the meeting, to the banquet with Esther and the king. So he is trundled off to that, and he goes there, and so now they're in their meal. They've had a sumptuous meal, and they're into their cups, I'm sure. And so the king says, okay, Esther, now tell me what it is that you really want. Now, up to the half of my kingdom, I'll give you up to the half of the kingdom. And she says, well, there's an edict out there that says that you're going to kill all of the Jews, and that would kill me too. And so the king was very, very upset with that. He says, I did what? I signed that? I said, yes. And so then she said, well, who would have got me to sign that? And so she looked over at the direction of Haman and said, this evil, vile Haman is the one that did that. And at this point, Haman is just absolutely, he's frozen in terror, because he knows that his goose is cooked. And the king just jumps up and storms out, and so out of the room, because he's so angry, and he doesn't know what to do. And so Haman jumps over there on the couch where the queen is, and remember, in the Oriental, in the Middle East there, they didn't sit in chairs like we do. They had little reclining couches. And so he's over there, and he grabs over to begging for mercy, and the king walks in, and there's old Haman, and it looks like he's kind of in a compromising position there. And so the king says, what? You're even trying to assault my queen on her own couch in this banquet that she prepared? And about that time, one of the king's servants said, hey, Haman's got this gallows that he built for somebody. Why not put him on that? And so sure enough, they did that, and they put Haman out on the gallows, and he was foisted on his own petard, as it were. And so then the upshoot of it all is that there was still this that would have been, if this was a fairy tale, that would have been the end of it, because the bad guy was killed and they lived happily ever after. But they have this one problem, and it's called the irrevocability of Persian law. Once the king had written something out, he couldn't unwrite it. You can't just reprieve it or do away with it. And so it had been written. So what do they do? What do they do? All right. Well, I came up with the plan. They said, okay, now if you look back, let's look back at our timeline here, and we see that this execution of the Jews was going to take place on like the 13th of Adar, and it was first written. The edict was written on like the 13th of Nisan. Well, how did they come up with this date? Well, actually, they threw lots. It's called a pur, and that's where we get the name Purim. They just threw lots, and it came up with this date 11 months later, that they would kill all the Jews. And so there again, that was God's planning, because that gave the Jews plenty of time to get prepared for all this. So anyway, what the king says to Mordecai, he says, okay, well, let's Mordecai said, look, why don't you let the Jews defend themselves? Because you can't undo the edict where it says that okay, you can go kill the Jews. Just let them defend themselves, and it'll be that's the best we can do. And so the king said, good idea, we'll do that. And so and many of the Jews had already been in the Persian army, because they were all conscripted, and so they were warriors. Many of the Jews were definitely warriors, and so when the people of the Persian Empire saw which way the wind was blowing here, that the Jews were held in high favor by Ahasuerus, because after all, his queen was Jewish, and he obviously liked his queen, and so it says that people were converting to Judaism, and they were converting to Judaism out of fear of the Jews. So anyway, they were really afraid of this. So what happens is then that when the 13th of Nisan comes along, of Adar, 13th of Adar comes along, and the people of the Persian Empire, the enemies of the Jewish people who were just recalcitrant, maybe it's some of those leftover Amalekites or whatever they are, the Aggies, they rose up against the Jews, but they were prepared for them. And the Bible says that there were something like 75,000 people fell at the hand of the Jews when they tried to attack them. Mordecai's 10 sons were all executed. And Mordecai's estate was given to Esther, and in fact Esther then took that estate and gave it to Mordecai. Mordecai was then elevated to the position of prime minister, the same job that Haman had previously. And from what we know from the records, then Mordecai, he was a good administrator and a good prime minister. And Haman's 10 sons. I said, okay, thank you. Haman's 10 sons were executed. And actually they had somehow holed up, hoping against hope for this 11 months that something wouldn't happen to them. But on the 13th of Adar, they were executed, and all of the estates of Haman were given to Esther, who then gave it to Mordecai. So that basically is the story of Esther. And I think I left some of these slides in here. We kind of already talked about them, about who is Ahasuerus, and we said, well, he is either Xerxes or Artaxerxes, just depending on which historian you read, or which one of the PhD deities in history that you're talking about. And I found it both ways, and they have convincing arguments either way. But that's who Ahasuerus was. He was a real guy, and the story of Esther, it's a real story. And unless it's like a lot of things in the Bible, people choose not to believe it, but we do. And let's see, going into who was Esther. We talked about this, a fourth generation Jewish exile. She had never lived in Israel. So, she is a product of her time and living there in Persia. And her Jewish name, of course, was Hadassah, which I think that's just a pretty name. The Persian name means star, and it comes from the goddess Ishtar. And so it's kind of funny that some people say, well, Easter comes from the name of Ishtar, and so that's evil. But Esther's okay. We can celebrate Purim and Esther, but not Easter. So it's kind of silly. Esther was an orphan, and she was brought up by her older cousin or uncle or what. He was a relative, Mordecai. And then, of course, we talked about who was Hamar the Aggie, and he was the son of Haman was an Agagite, son of Hamadatha, and he was probably a descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and they were long time enemies of the Jews. And here's in Samuel. Let's see what I'll cover up here. 1 Samuel 15, 2 and 3. And the reason I'm reading these things off is because some people call in and they don't have the slides. Says, thus said Adonai Sabaoth, that's the Lord God of hosts. I remember what Amalek did to Israel, how he set himself against him on the way while he was coming up from Egypt. Now go and strike down Amalek and put all that he has under the ban of destruction. Have no pity on him. Kill both men, women, children, nursing infants, oxen, sheep, camels, and donkeys. And basically he wanted the entire memory of the Amalekites done away with. And Saul didn't do it. And so as a result, then there were consequences later on. And we find that a lot of times when God tells us to do something and we don't do it. Well, you might get by with it, but there's going to be, you think, but there's always consequences later on, perhaps. So anyway, that is basically the story of Purim. And I think we've talked about in the past of what we do. We'll read this week in the synagogue. We'll read parts of the story of Esther and the book. It's the Megillah. It's the book of Esther, and we'll read that. And whenever Esther's name is said, people will, they'll cheer, say, "May she be blessed." And when Mordecai is mentioned, we'll cheer, "Yay!" But when Haman is mentioned, we've got these clackers and noisemakers and cowbells and all sorts of and do all sorts of stuff like that. And it's just a fun time. And then after that, then we'll have oneg, and we'll have. Notice how it always comes down to food with me. We'll have oneg, and we'll have hamantashen. The hamantashen are the little tri-cornered cookies, and those are really, really tasty. All right, so Ray said, they tried to kill us, we won. Let's eat. Amen.
Okay, you have a question here.
Okay, I had a question up there someplace. Is there a connection between the Amalekites and today's Palestinians? I don't know the answer to that. Whether or not there is a connection, a direct connection or not, I would really have to research that. So I'm not going to pop off and just say one thing or another. But I will get an answer for you, Alan. I will look that up.
But we do know that today's Palestinians are not the Palestinians back of that era. The Arabs who claim to have had the land and are Palestinians, Arabs are from Arabia. They're not from Palestine. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a false claim. The Palestinians were another people from way back when.
Okay. So anyway, that concludes the recorded portion. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to wish everyone Shavua Tov. Have a good week and enjoy Purim this week. Have a good time. I think we will also get together with some friends someplace and eat again. And so we're looking forward to that. I think Jewish people are very much, they must be related to Pentecostals because they certainly know how to eat. And I think Chuck is over there saying, yep, that'll do it. And
he was there yesterday.
All right, good deal. All right, well, I do want to thank you for being with us, and I'm going to close off the recording.